Hello, Alabama fans, and welcome to the BOL Roundtable Show. I'm Tim Watts, the BamaOnLine site publisher, and with me is the recruiting editor, Andrew Bone, and our world traveler, Joseph Hastings, who is back from another road trip, goes to Italy, goes to Texas. We just can't keep him sitting down. The landlord was surprised to see him this morning. He almost called the cops, but welcome back, and quite an eventful week for us. We're going to start with Joseph on the road. Had some really good content. The only thing negative about being on the road is it's Friday night. It's Thursday night, it's Friday night. There was NFL football. But Joseph, let's go over some of the stuff that you saw this week because you saw two big time Alabama prospects, starting with Ty Haywood on Thursday.
Yeah, Ty Haywood, 5-star offensive tackle, number 2 tackle in the 2025 recruiting cycle, committed to Alabama back on July 14th. It was great being able to, see him in person for the first time. We had talked previously. I know Bone had talked with his mom, but got to speak with both of them during my trip. Great people, had amazing conversations with them, and just seeing Ty in person. I mean, he's all of the 6'4", 300 plus pounds that we have him listed at. Moves really well. It was interesting because he had a couple of knee braces on because of a prior game in which the teams were targeting at his lower body. So I don't know how much that affected his mobility. It really didn't look like that in the game that I saw him play. It looked really good size-wise, getting to the next level with multiple blocks on the same play. Just a really good player and also just a good person too. Got to talk with him after about his commitment status with Alabama. He talked about how locked in he is with the Crimson Tide and the communication that he continues to have with the coaching staff, from Coach Kapilovich to Courtney Morgan to Coach DeBoer. Alabama continues to make him feel like a priority, even though he's committed. So, yeah, a great trip and really enjoyed seeing Ty this past week.
Andrew, we've talked about Ty, but I don't feel like you can really talk about him enough. I mean, there's guys that happen because so much happened in that 6-week window. Keelan Russell to Caleb Cunningham, that so much happened. Let's talk a little bit about Ty and what he means to this class, how he kind of fell into the class, and what kind of player he is.
Yeah, it was his commitment also happened during that dead period, and then you had the Champions Cookout that happened, and there was just a lot of kind of different things that were happening around that time. So people may not have celebrated the Ty Haywood commitment as much as they should have. I mean, that was a huge get for Alabama. This is a kid who, he grew up an Alabama fan, but he had never been to Tuscaloosa on a visit. That's a lot of times important. You got to get to campus. You got to meet the coaching staff. You got to develop that relationship. You got to go to a school and see, is this the type of culture that you want to be associated with and a part of? And once he made it to Tuscaloosa on that May 31st through June 2nd official visit, it was over with. I mean, there were other schools that were involved: Florida State, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and he ended up taking official visits to A&M and Florida State, but the biggest challenger in the recruitment was Oklahoma, and he ends up not going to Norman for the official visit. I think there was some family stuff that happening that weekend, so he ended up not going over. But getting him on board, getting him as a solid commitment has been huge. I know Joseph has a great interview, coming to BOL with our. Posted a great interview on BOL the other day with Ty Haywood about his commitment status with Alabama. So encourage people to go see that. But that was a huge win for Alabama, getting a top 10 overall player in the country. That offensive line class is certainly pretty spectacular in this cycle.
Kind of what stood out to me in that thing was that nobody really enjoyed the commitment. First of all, not to pat ourselves on the back, we did a really good job of setting those up and covering them, so you kind of knew it was coming. But that first question right after was, who's next? I don't think anybody took a minute. It's like a 6-year-old running through his Christmas presents, never really stops at one until Christmas is over, and then he's kind of pissed it's over. But I think that's a big deal. And again, you had that class set up so nicely with the dominoes of the offensive line. I think you flop back in, and next thing you know, you're finishing it off with a Ty Haywood, which is, I'm not sure you could ask, for anything else from a talent standpoint. Joseph was there on Thursday night, but on Friday, he made his trip over to see everyone's favorite quarterback one, Keelan Russell. Andrew and I were watching live on the BOL Roundtable, checking it out and watching it. But Joseph was there, and again, Keelan with a big performance, kind of showing that quick rise and how everything's, the dominoes that are falling with him.
Yeah, and before we get into his performance, you talk about Ty Haywood kind of be the bookend of that cold summer stretch. I mean, Keelan Russell got things started with his commitment on June 4th. And, you know, we were talking, we did our video interview after his game, and he was wearing an Alabama hat. He had the Alabama towel on during the game, and he said, look, I committed and everyone else followed. You know, he kind of takes pride in being the leader of this class and recruiting guys and building relationships. That's incredibly important for him to get to know his future teammates. And he's just a very likable kid. Had a smile on his face the entire time, talking with his teammates. I saw him before the game breaking the huddle, leading the warm-ups, leading the stretching with his group of guys, and they look to him. And look, let's understand, Duncanville High School has the nation's #3 overall player, top-ranked wide receiver, Decorian Moore, on their team. Keelan Russell is a clear leader of that group, and I really enjoyed to see that aspect of him, and then also just the performance itself. 5 touchdowns. I believe it was the 5 different wide receivers, if I'm not mistaken, 4 or 5 different wide receivers. Really got the ball out, showed his accuracy, specifically in that first half. He was just putting the ball right on the numbers. And look, he's got a good size too. I know that was something that we had talked about before. He definitely seems to have put on some additional muscle in the off season. About 6'4" right now, closing in on 190 pounds or close to that. And definitely looks the part as one of the top quarterbacks in this 2025 cycle. Also showed that mobility. And also had a great conversation with his dad. We'll be posting that soon. So a lot to like about Keelan Russell.
You know, Andrew, when Kalen DeBoer got here, and I'm telling you, it didn't hit me until there was a coaching change when I was like, who are they going to recruit at quarterback? And I went to the on3.com database. And I was like, holy crap, everybody's committed. Like the vast majority, like it's shocking how many of the top 10, 20 quarterbacks were committed in January. Of course, we're focused on finishing off that 2024 cycle, not really worried about 2025. But when I flashed ahead, I was like, wow, just talk about the Bama staff and get what he got. And again, Joseph touched on it. We've touched on it several times, but he kind of kick-started that class because that's sure when those dominoes started to fall.
I think when Coach DeBoer first arrived and you look at the quarterback board and every single player is committed, you're wondering, well, who's still out there? Well, still a long way until, the early signing period. So you can recruit any of those guys that are committed. You can bring those guys on campus. I even had a 5-star in Tuscaloosa that committed to Mizzou, Matt Zollers, that was offered by a lot of top programs. They decided to wait. They held off on, which was, sort of impressive to me. You had a 5-star quarterback on campus. You bring him in town for an unofficial visit. He's about to make a decision, and you stay patient. You hold off. You say, all right, I'm not ready to extend you an offer because I'm not ready to accept a commitment just yet. I want to evaluate all these different guys that are still out there, regardless of where they are committed, and try to get them, A, either to campus at some point, or B, go out and personally evaluate them. Well, Keelan Russell wasn't able to get to Tuscaloosa for an unofficial visit during the spring. So Nick Sheridan, one of the first weeks out on the recruiting trail during the spring evaluation period, went out, saw about 4 or 5 different quarterbacks throughout the country, saw Keelan Russell. He was the only one that got extended an offer. And I remember, we were asking around at the time, is this a committable offer? Because we're used to those spring offers. A lot of times they're not normally committable. You still got to come to camp. You got to show out and to earn that offer in front of the head coach, which is Kalen DeBoer. Well, Nick Sheridan goes out there, sees him, extends the offer, and we heard pretty much immediately he could pick up the phone, commit right then. He did not have to come for a camp or anything like that. They were trying to set up an official visit, which they were able to do that first weekend in June. So getting him on board early was certainly beneficial for this Alabama class. He was on campus that weekend with Ty Haywood. So being around him, being around a lot of those guys, I talked to Ty Haywood's mom last month, and she told me Keelan was already recruiting Ty to Alabama when he was on campus. He was still committed to SMU at the time. Now, he may have told Alabama that he was already going there, but he was already becoming a leader of the class, wanted to be a face of it, and helped get some other guys on campus. Some guys that ended up not going to Alabama, Kalik Lockett, but we weren't even talking about Kalik Lockett on June the 1st or June the 10th. We started talking about him about 2 weeks later. but that was the power and the effect of Keelan Russell. People know him. People have gravitate towards him. I think that's been a big help for Alabama on the recruiting trail this cycle, and he's a very solid commitment, as JoJo mentioned.
I'd like to give a shout out to the Bama staff for really being thorough in their evaluation. Everybody was in a rush. Again, there was throw Juju a blank check. Bama fans love to throw a blank check. I've noticed it's not their checkbook, but they'll write one for somebody else in a heartbeat. And so they did the right thing. Went out, saw their guys, and once they got their guy, that's the thing that stood out to me the most was how quick and how active they were in getting him on Kansas. For you guys that are checking us out today, we want to remind you there is a flash sale on BamaOnLine.com. 50% off your annual subs. We love doing the YouTube show. We have a lot of fun here, especially making fun of each other and how we dress. But there's even more activity on the Bama Online Roundtable. That thing stays active. We had a very busy weekend, not just with the Alabama football team, but with recruiting news. That's where the news broke about Justus Terry, who we're going to talk about in a minute, where he was visiting Alabama this week. Obviously, a massive recruit. But you guys also do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe button. We appreciate y'all for being here. And speaking of Justus Terry, talk a little bit about him. I mean, the news broke Saturday, and the thing about Justus is like he's had plans before where he changed his mind, and he's changed his mind. So we kind of wait for Justus to get on campus, but he arrived 2:00 before the kickoff. So, Andrew, talk about Justus a little bit, what kind of player he is, and getting him on campus.
Yeah, I mean, and talking about people that watch our show, we really appreciate y'all. And I had so many different people come up to me in Tuscaloosa this weekend say they watch our show. This is the only place they get their news from. So thank y'all so much. Remember, we do have BamaOnLine.com, and take advantage of that 50% off sale. But Justus, I say that because one person came up to me on Saturday, just nudged me, and I turned around, didn't know the guy. And he says, "Hey, I saw where Justus Terry's in town." So people were all aware of it from our post on BOL over the weekend. But getting Justus Terry back in Tuscaloosa, we talked about this on the show. We talked about it on BOL. They needed to get him in town either before or after that Georgia game because everybody's coming to Georgia. He's been listed on that Georgia visitors list since about mid-June. We knew he was going to be at that game. There's going to be a lot of top recruits that are going to be there. We're going to have an extensive list on BOL. But we all said that he needs to get back for another game so that he can be around the coaching staff. There's not going to be a ton of kids there. They can spend a lot more attention on him, and that's what they were able to do this weekend. So getting him back in town for the weekend, huge. Still think it's Georgia is going to be a tough out for Justus Terry just because he's been there so many times. Went there in late June, went to the Georgia Clemson game. They're going all in on him. But they still have Elijah Griffin, another 5-star defensive lineman on their big board that they're recruiting. So it'll be interesting. Can they get both of those guys? Can Alabama sneak in and get Justus Terry? This is going to go all the way down until December the 4th, that early signing period. But getting him on campus this weekend was significant, in my opinion.
The one thing about Justus is that getting him on campus for the Georgia game, that was not a big deal. We know Georgia's involved, but to get him on campus at Alabama, and don't forget Georgia was in Athens on Saturday. So it's a small hint. I think that's just part of the collective with Justus, what he's trying to figure out. We're going to have a little bit more intel, a recruiting nugget on Justus later on BamaOnline.com. Still doing some digging because that was a pretty extensive visit. I think he came in, had a good time. And Joseph, tell us some of your thoughts on the impact of what they, because the defensive line is what Alabama wants, but there's not really a big name commitment on that defensive line right now.
No, there is. And, you've got London Simmons in the fold, Stephen Buamau. London had just taken his second visit to Alabama of the fall, putting up some pretty good numbers there at Hartfield Academy in his senior season. Looks really good after losing weight, anchoring down that interior to defensive line, also playing on the other side of the ball. And obviously, Steve looks the part too. And Justus is somebody who you see him in person. I mean, he looks like a 5-star prospect. You can quickly tell why he's one of the top 10 players in the country. Explosive off the line, really good hand movement. Just looks different compared to other defensive linemen in this class, and would be a massive addition to any program that he chooses. Even if there is already another 5-star defensive lineman in the fold, because of just the type of player that he is and his potential to his ceiling. And yeah, I agree. Getting him on campus for the USF game ahead of the Georgia game. I was wondering if there was a possibility of him visiting during that bye week, between the Wisconsin Georgia games. If there was a possibility he'd be there then, but he got on campus for a game day, the top recruit in town, got a lot of attention. So I think that's really important because that Georgia game is going to be crowded. There's going to be a lot of recruits on campus. A lot of people are going to want to be at that game. So I think this was a big visit.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Justice, I mean, he's not only one of the most elite players in the country, he's one of the top uncommitted players in the country. He might be the top. Him and Elijah Griffin, both big defensive tackles from there. So obviously just a massive name to get on campus. Now Alabama has not, and we'll talk about that too on the defensive line. Alabama's not sitting idle. The one thing about Freddie Rhodes, they have a new offer out today, in fact. The one thing about Freddie Rhodes, he has a type when it comes to the defensive line, right? Now, I mean, there's nobody who can say this defensive line group isn't pretty solid this year. So he has like a body type he goes for. And a lot of these guys that Alabama you see play, Keenan was not a big name prospect. I mean, he was a big guy, but he wasn't a big name. I think he might have even been a 3-star. A lot of these guys were considered, kind of afterthoughts for the most part. James Smith obviously was a top guy, but we're going to have more of those offers later on. Another big visitor, Caleb Cunningham. I think that was kind of important to get him on campus. He went to Ole Miss last week, came back to Alabama. Joseph, give us some thoughts on Caleb.
Yeah, Caleb making it for this visit is important. Look, you want to get your commitments on campus as much as you can. Talked about London Simmons visiting for a couple of times. Want to get Caleb in the fold as much as possible. Expected to visit for the Georgia game as well. You've got other schools recruiting him. He's mentioned that he wants to visit Mississippi State, wants to visit LSU. Don't know if he may get out to another school, but once again, if you're Alabama, you want to get your one of your top commitments, the top commitment, wide receiver commitment to get on campus as much as you can. And Caleb Cunningham is a big time player, number 13 overall in the 2025 recruiting cycle. One of the top wide receivers, and getting him on the fold on campus is important. So Caleb has talked about it before. He feels at home at Alabama. The coaching staff, he has really good connections with the entire staff, specifically Aaron Hodges. He's done a really good job with connecting with him, and also Jamarcus Shepard, and getting him back once again, being around some of those commitments, some of his future teammates, and seeing someone like Ryan Williams continue to do what he does as a true freshman is important. So, we'll see what the rest of his fall visit schedule looks like. We're supposed to catch up with him at some point today. And once again, nice getting him and also another top commitment from Mississippi back on campus.
Yeah, the thing, Robert Gillespie there, he's got to play a role with anybody from Mississippi, being heavily from Mississippi, a proud Mississippian. So I think that's a connection there. Andrew, give us some of your thoughts, because I mean, the prevailing thought is if you've been following recruiting a long time, if you're old like Andrew is, not young like me and Joseph, if you're old like Andrew, you've seen a lot of weird stuff happen in Mississippi. That's granted. That's a given. Things have always happened in Mississippi, but I feel like it's a little bit different right now. I think I looked up the top 5 players in the state of Mississippi are committed elsewhere. I think 3 of the top 5 2 years ago left the state. Also, you got a head coach, Lane Kiffin, who really values the portal. We're going to see how that turns out. They're a top 6 team. So, instead of prioritizing high school players, so you got a lot going on there. Just give us some thoughts on Cunningham, because that Ole Miss crowd continues to think they have a chance. And very well, it's recruiting. Everybody has a chance to some degree. But share some thoughts there, Andrew.
Yeah, I think the stigma from not being able to go into Mississippi kind of started a couple decades ago, and maybe even before that. But as long as we've been covering recruiting, because a lot of those kids just remained under the radar until December. So you had a lot of guys that they might have been 3-stars. They weren't national recruits. They weren't going out to different college camps or going to these big prospect camps where 50 different top high school recruits in the country are participating. So you didn't see a lot of those guys until the Alabama-Mississippi All-Star game late in the year, and they were already committed to Ole Miss. They were committed to Mississippi State. They tried to keep those kids under wraps. And Alabama's, the Georgias, all these other programs start offering them late. They flip, they start looking, but then they end up staying with the home state school. But I think Alabama has done a really good job in Mississippi through the years. We saw that in the last couple of years. Bray Hubbard, two-time Mr. Football winner. You get Daniel Hill last year, and then this year you got the trifecta in Cunningham, A.K. Deer, and then and London Simmons. But I think, getting those guys back on campus, Caleb Cunningham this weekend, A.K. Deer 2 weekends in a row, London Simmons 2 weekends in a row. And we know those guys are going to be back in town for the Georgia game. They're continuing to grow more comfortable with this staff, with the environment, with the fan base, which is important. Now, you're going to have a lot of kids that are going to be on campus throughout the season. You're also going to have a lot of your commitments that are going to go out, experience different things. You remember Ryan Williams last year skipped the Alabama-Tennessee game.
We remember.
In Tuscaloosa.
We remember.
Was in Tuscaloosa. He went to Auburn that weekend, and everybody was freaking out on the Alabama board. Everybody was excited on the Auburn board. It was a done deal. He doesn't mean that always. A lot of kids just want to go experience different things, want to go, maybe they didn't have a ride to Tuscaloosa. Maybe they had friends on their team that were going to this place and they wanted to go experience that with their friends that weekend. That happens all the time. So you can't freak out over every single time a commitment goes and visits another school. Just like we saw with Dawson Merritt this weekend, takes a visit out to Nebraska. Everyone thinks, oh, that must mean he's flipping to Nebraska. We talked to his father. He gave us some positive feedback about Alabama. We posted on the BOL message board last night, and but it's going to happen all season long. It's always going to be about the visits, either to Alabama or to somewhere else, every single weekend.
Joseph talked about London Simmons. We probably haven't talked about him enough. The Mississippi defensive lineman. He didn't lose some weight. He lost a 6-year-old child. 40 pounds is what he lost. He lost a elementary student, at least kindergartner, right? They're got to be around 40 pounds in kindergarten.
I need to talk to London about his diet plan.
Oh, goodness, man. Hey, when you're 17, it's hard to actually put on weight. So, again, that's a big get, and to get him. And another guy. Now, this is another one. This is probably the most mysterious Mississippi guy, A.K. Deer, because A.K. Deer got in that rush of commitments, starting with Keelan and then with Caleb. But we all thought Caleb was going to commit. We knew when Caleb was going to commit. He kind of gave us an off-the-record rough draft. Well, AK never committed to a commitment date. So there was a lot of people that got worried. I mean, he drug that out. It seemed like months, was a couple of weeks maybe, but we weren't sure when he was going to commit. We knew what he had told the Bama staff. We knew where he was. But again, a very elite player, number 2 running back in the nation, just a big monster guy, falling on the heels of Dan. I mean, look, Robert Gillespie, I don't think you can say enough about him, for stacking his room. I think the running back room, the defensive line room, both of those have done a great job, which makes sense because they're the only 2 coaches who've continued through both staffs. But again, getting a guy like A.K. Deer, Andrew, that's huge.
Yeah, and I think the good thing is you got coaches on this staff who know what to look for, who've been, coaching in the SEC, been coaching at a high level at Alabama. They know what they're looking for. They know what they want. Obviously, scheme changes a little bit. You're still looking for, the right fit, but I think Freddie Roach does a tremendous job. I think, Robert Gillespie has obviously done a fantastic job recruiting running backs these last few years, with A.K. Deer. And we still see it. We still see people say that he's potentially going to flip by signing day. Well, A.K. Deer said absolutely nothing to that effect. I think sometimes it's wishful thinking. He said that he is 100% solid. As of right now, not taking any other game day visits, has been to Tuscaloosa 2 weekends in a row. Not for the biggest games, but, being in Tuscaloosa for the home opener, the Nick Saban field dedication, and then you're going to have him back in Tuscaloosa for these SEC games. Obviously, you're going to watch, see if he ends up going anywhere else, but he seems like he is very solid with that commitment. And you mentioned earlier about Caleb Cunningham. Ole Miss fans, they really hope they can flip him. Mississippi State fans, they really hope they can flip him. He hasn't said anything to indicate that he's on flip watch. He said that he's 100% solid. He is going to take some visits, enjoy the process, but I think that relationship with Jamarcus Shepard started back in January when Jamarcus Shepard went out there and saw him during that winter evaluation, met him. Caleb wasn't even going to have Alabama in his top. Joseph, what was it, top 10 or top 12?
Top 12, yeah. They weren't going to make it.
Wasn't going to make the top 12.
No.
Jamarcus Shepard made such a big impact on him, put Alabama in that list, came to Tuscaloosa in the spring, said, didn't want to leave after that first time on campus, and then comes back for that June 21st official visit. And, it was a wrap, but it's recruiting, and schools are going to recruit these guys all the way until the end.
Yeah, they are. Joseph, give
you
us some
gotta recruit
thoughts.
them until the end.
Joseph, give us some thoughts on AK coming in. And again, remember, he brought his whole family with him. And we had people that were seeing him very visible in the first game, extremely excited during that big win against Western Kentucky.
Yeah, we had talked with his mentor shortly after he committed, and we were told that his recruitment was shut down. He was focused on Alabama and his season. That's something that kind of heard from Ty Haywood and Keelan Russell, both him and his camp, during my road trip last week. Is they just wanted to commit and focus on their future program and their current team more specifically, and that's kind of where AK's focus has been. And you hear something like that, but you also want to see the proof in the pudding, as so to speak, when it comes to the visits. And he visited Alabama 2 weekends in a row, expected to be back for that Georgia game. That's the first 3 home games of the season at the very least. We'll see what he ends up doing afterward in terms of his visit schedule, but highly encouraging. He has strong relationships there, not only with Coach Gillespie, as Bone and you, Tim, talked about, but also with Daniel Hill too. Some of the current Alabama players like Ryan Williams pitched into recruiting AK during his official visit June 14th through the 16th. And yeah, you guys mentioned it. It was a little bit of a nerve-wracking time. He decommitted from Ole Miss at the end of June. There were predictions that came in for Alabama shortly before. Thought maybe there could be a commitment in the coming couple of weeks after. Didn't happen. He ended up taking that Champions Cookout visit on July 28th and committed to Alabama a few weeks later. Really took his time in the process. And that's something that you kind of want to see. You don't want to see a rushed decision made and then some regrets or, second thoughts after. He seems to have, gone through with that process the way that he wanted to. And, Alabama's got him on campus his first 2 weekends, which is really encouraging.
Atasan Ocelot. I didn't say any of that right. Shout out to JMO, who did have a huge game last night. He looked fantastic. He had a 15-yard run, 5 receptions for 120 yards. Glad to see he's healthy. So that's a good shout out. A little bit here. We got a question. 5 Adam wants us to update tight end Marshall Pritchett. I don't think there's a whole lot happening right now with the Tides. I think they're still watching. They have the new offer out that we're going to discuss in a minute. We can go ahead and discuss them now. Alabama went where else? Going back to Cali, found a tight end. And look, I'm going to tell y'all, this kid is a monster. When I was watching, not just his film, but his off the stuff, his name's Vander Ploog. Is that right? Is it Ploog? Ploog? Yeah. Ploog. He's from California. Now, he reminded me athletically of Jackson Lloyd when I first saw him play baseball and basketball. This guy's out there doing a backflip. 6'6", just a monster. He doesn't play a high level of football, but I don't care if he was at Matter Day, he'd have offers from across the country. I think he'd definitely be a top 100 tight end. Let's talk a little bit about that and touch on Pritchett, Joseph.
Yeah, so talking about Vander Ploeg, it's actually interesting because he has a connection to Alabama that goes back well over a year. He was talking with Nick Sheridan back when he was the tight ends coach at Washington, had built a good relationship with him then. And then he visited Alabama earlier this year, back in the spring. It was a little bit of a last-minute visit. It was interesting how it was set up. I think he got a text from Brian Ellis on Friday and ended up flying out the next day. It was a last-minute visit, but he got on campus. So all that's just to say that this isn't, Alabama, going last minute for somebody or, just getting a late evaluation on him. He's been on their radar for quite some time now. Saw him again during the spring evaluation period. Alabama went out and saw him. So they've done their evaluations on him. They've been thorough with that and decided to extend him an offer. He's committed to Washington. We're going to see if he ends up getting out to Alabama for a game. That's going to be, the next step there to get him back on campus for a visit. But and then also kind of the same case with Marshall Pritchett, see if he gets back on campus. And, honestly, wouldn't be a surprise if any of these guys get out for the Georgia game. That's just such a massive game. Everybody's going to want to be at that. But I'd really be interested in seeing if they get out maybe for a different game, potentially for an official visit at some point this fall. But that's kind of where things stand with those two guys right now.
Yeah, Andrew, we've seen, and I think that's the misconception is that when Alabama staff, and this goes all the way back to Nick Saban, this is nothing new. When there's a new offer out, they think they've missed somebody. They've missed on somebody. In fact, one of my favorite things is whoever commits, they want to know how it affects somebody else. Look, there's not many positions where there's just one long snapper. You don't see multiple long snappers. You don't see multiple punters, multiple kickers. Not too often you see a quarterback, but there's multiple wide receivers and defensive linemen, offensive lineman, linebacker. So they don't always affect each other. And it's not always the fact of a miss. I mean, we saw Alabama offer a linebacker this weekend who took a visit, commitment to LSU. Andrew, tell us a little bit about him.
It cut out. What name did you say?
The LSU linebacker commit.
Jaden Breaker.
Yeah, Jaden Breaker, who came to Jaden Breaker's linebacker from where's he from? Georgia?
Georgia.
Committed to LSU, and he came to Alabama for an unofficial visit.
I think the common theme that we keep seeing with all these guys that have been getting offered by Alabama over the course of the last couple of weeks, and as you mentioned, a lot of them have been in communication with the staff since June. It's nothing new. A lot of these kids just didn't have an opportunity to make it to campus during the summer evaluation period. So a lot of these coaches are having to wait till the fall to watch them play. Jaden Breaker is one of those guys that never stepped foot in Tuscaloosa until last weekend. The interest has skyrocketed this season. Georgia has also recently offered him. Has been committed to LSU since the 31st of July. So this is certainly a guy that we're going to be watching very closely over the next couple of not just next couple of weeks, but probably these next couple of months. I think when Jaden Harmon ended up decommitting and flipping his commitment to Tennessee, that opened up a spot. It didn't necessarily mean, we got to go find somebody to replace him, but there was a spot that was available. You could start looking, seeing if there was anybody out there that that fit the program, culture-wise, talent-wise. And you start evaluating, you start going out, you seeing these kids, and Jaden Breaker is one of those guys that they really like. If you don't see a high school player that you like and that you want, you don't have to offer them. You don't have to go after them because you can go after players in the transfer portal. So Jaden Breaker is a guy that is now on Alabama's radar. They're certainly looking hard at him. And there's some other guys that we'll talk about here in a minute that have been offered over the course of the last couple of weeks that they're really starting to put the full court press on. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in these next few months. We mentioned it back in August and in July. There were going to be more players that emerged on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. It wasn't just going to be at safety or the defensive line. There was going to be different positions. We've seen tight end. We've seen linebacker now. You never know who might emerge as a senior.
Definitely.
All right, we got Monday jokes from one of the show favorite and a BamaOnLine.com favorite roundtable message board. She's come flying in with her Monday jokes, probably fresh off some road trip to some exotic location. But welcome to the show, Tara. Todd Jackson update from Masked Up Daytona. He has committed. Right now, we think he's firm. His parents went with him to USC. He committed. Not completely surprising he didn't end up at Alabama, although Alabama is one of the schools, but it's quite the surprise. He ended up at USC. We're just going to have to wait and see what happens from there. 5, Adam, we need to improve the D-line recruiting. We've said that for like 5 years, and yet the D-line unit's literally the best on this football team right now. I mean, Kalen DeBoer arrived. One of the first things Kane Womack said was how deep it is, what a good group it is. There's certainly performance for that level. The one thing with defensive line to remember, 5 stars don't matter worth a flip 99% of the time because most kids are not ready to go in the interior and go against Landon Dickerson. You're not 18 years old battling those grown men, so it's more of a developmental position. And there's
only 2 5-stars in the entire country in this recruiting cycle. And they're both in Georgia, Justus Terry, Elijah Griffin. And it's just not a very deep defensive line class. Somebody even said a year ago, why can't Alabama ever get the 5-star defensive lineman? This is about 4 months after Alabama had just signed James Smith, the number 1 defensive lineman in the country. So they do recruit well. But as you mentioned, it is a developmental position.
And also,
go ahead, Joe. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add that, people were talking on the BOO roundtable about Justus Terry being at this game and Alabama's performance throughout. I don't think the interior, the defensive line was, didn't hold up their end against USF. I thought they showed some encouraging things. James Smith, Tim Keenan, Tim Smith, I think and that's where Justus Terry is looking at. That's the position group that he's focused on. So I think that was a pretty good showing for someone like him.
Yeah, and I think the one thing to remember is the reaction of a lot of this stuff. Again, the portal changes everything, and the visit. We get a lot of Alabama probably lost commitments because they played a close game. Let me be honest, a 17-year-old's probably not locked to that TV in that Alabama game. One of the first mentions when Ty went to USC was, yeah, look, after he probably saw the Bama game. Hell no, he was in California, in Los Angeles. Probably the only thing he saw was the final score, would be my guess. I don't think that he was sitting in LA getting ready to commit to Lincoln Riley and worrying about the Alabama South Florida game. I had friends who weren't even focused on that game. I mean, it's just human nature. I do want to say, I think adults, and this is kind of insulting, but it's true. Adults react more emotional than teenagers to this stuff. Especially now, it's basically a business decision. I don't think Auburn's going to lose every commitment they got when they have probably pretty decent NIL offers. We know they do. And they knew they weren't going to be particularly great. So losing to Cal, struggling against South Florida doesn't mean you lose commitments. And beating, Texas A&M and Texas A&M doesn't mean you're going to get every kid in Texas. Anyways, let's talk about the offer this morning. We have the D-line recruitment. People are talking about that. And let's talk about Christian Ingram, pretty interesting guy who got an offer from Georgia this morning, 6'6", 280. Joseph, give us a little bit on your initial thoughts on this guy.
Yeah, I actually just got a couple of pictures sent of Christian Ingram right now from our Jeremy Johnson. He interviewed Christian for us. Got to get us some quotes on Alabama and that his reaction to that offer. Recently got offered by Georgia as well. You talked about it too, Bone. I mean, look, with some of these guys here, not getting them on campus beforehand or not being able to see them as much, you take a look at that senior film, you see that senior season film, what they've been able to put on tape, and somebody like Christian Ingram jumps out at that size that Tim talked about, 6'6", 280. Going to kind of see with him what position in particular he's looking at. Could potentially be one of those bandit candidates. We'll see what goes on throughout the evaluation of him, but somebody who's starting to emerge right now, getting interest from other programs. So yeah, the D-line board is expanding. Obviously lost Antonio Coleman to flip to Auburn. So there's another spot or two potentially open there. Obviously Justus Terry is the headliner, but they offered Christian extended another offer to somebody who visited this past weekend, Tim Griffin, so who we'll talk about later. But yeah, that D-line board is continuing to be open.
Andrew, we talked going into this class that we didn't expect a big defensive line group. We said the same thing about wide receiver, and again, they were trying to sign every 5-star listed on the On3 database. Talk about the defensive lineman, what they've got. Steve, previously a Bandit. Steve from Quebec City, the Christmas capital of the world, now in Mississippi JUCO. He's already grown from he was a big Bandit to begin with, and now he's on the verge of being a big defensive tackle. So talk about the guy we got. We've already touched on Lyndon Simmons and what they're looking for to finish out the class.
Yeah, Steve is Steve Mbamua is a 6'3.5", 280 pounds, just tank. I mean, he is very impressive. I remember when he came to Alabama's camp last summer, I think he was around 245 pounds, then got up to 265. Now he's around 280, and he physically looks the part. Is in JUCO for one semester. He'll be in Tuscaloosa in the spring. So I think getting him over there is going to be a big benefit. You got Lyndon Simmons, who the staff really loved once they saw him during the spring. He came back camp. Had a great performance in camp. So you got 2 defensive line commitments, an interior guy, maybe an interior guy with Steve. So we're just kind of waiting to see. Could be a Bandit. A lot's just going to depend on his development over the next year. But still looking for another player too. You can look in the transfer portal, but as we've kind of seen, Justus Terry made it to campus. I don't think you can bank on Justus Terry. You've got him, in your peripherals. You want him as part of your class, and you're in that running. But we're also seeing some new offers that are getting extended. Kind of proves that they want at least one more defensive lineman in this class, and they're going to try to find one. I think 4 would be the number they absolutely would want. But if they can get at least 3 and then go into the transfer portal, I think they'll be happy.
And Roll Tide from Bristol, UK. Joseph was there just a few weeks. It was in the UK just a few weeks ago. I was there last year. I feel like Simon Madge is such an awesome United Kingdom name. It's very close to Simon Pegg, one of my favorite actors. So welcome to the show and thanks for joining us. Yeah, touching on Steve. I mean, with him at 290 plus, I mean, seriously, we saw that photo and he dwarfed Freddie Roach, who's a pretty big guy. You know, I mean, he looked huge, and we've seen him. He's playing on the interior at his Mississippi Junior College. Me and Joseph got cross-eyed one night trying to watch a game. Look, I don't know who was filming Steve's JUCO game, but he thought he was Martin Scorsese. We had angles. We had angles.
Four different angles.
Joe, tell them.
Yeah.
We're not like 4 different angles in a junior college, and they were just rapid firing them back and forth. So very patient. Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. Hey, props for them for trying. And again, last reminder, we have the BamaOnLine.com flash sale. Some of you we recognize from the roundtable. If you haven't been on the roundtable, that's the BOL message board. We have a lot of fun, a lot of arguments, and a lot of discussions. Everything from pellet grills to the next year's quarterback, and we're already fretting on the 2026 class. 2027, though, we're happy with that group. They're rocking and rolling. But glad to have you. It's half off an annual price. You won't get a better deal than that. And again, appreciate you jumping in on the show and give us a chance. Like and subscribe if you get a chance. And thanks for being here. A few more guys we want to talk about. Timothy Griffin and Kamari Brooks. 2 more offers. And again, how many were we at, Andrew? Are we at double-digit new offers for the senior group? It's got to be closing in, right?
Close. I think it might be 7 or 8 right now, but it's more offers than I thought would get extended by this point. I thought we would see 3, 4 offers, but they've started to extend a few more offers than what we probably anticipated.
Yeah, and the one thing about the offers, not all will be committable. You still want to see Christian Ingram. We know Alabama's laid eyes on him. I talked to multiple people. You see guys listed at 6'6", they're often 6'4", whatever, still good size. But I was told he's a 6'5" plus by multiple people this morning. Obviously, his film, he looks really big. Joseph, talk about Kamari Brooks a little bit.
Yeah, Kamari Brooks, tight end, received an offer during his Alabama visit this past weekend out of Georgia. Got a couple big time offers, LSU, Ole Miss, some others as well. In that class of 2026. So. We talk about those 2025 offers that are being extended, and obviously those get a lot of attention. But this is kind of a time too where you start to see some of that early junior season film, which is a pivotal, season for recruits and where they really kind of start to emerge. And he got that offer, visited for the USF game. Being a Georgia kid, might get out for that Georgia game as well. And we've also seen some 2026, some 2027 offers even extended recently. Alabama even got a 2028 prospect on campus who took some pictures with AK Deer, London Simmons. So, we're getting old. We're continuing to get old. But, Alabama dipped into Brooks recruitment, and he's got some interest elsewhere.
Yeah, I'm pretty curious about this guy, what he's going to be. Again, he's a 2026 guy listed as a tight end. But, man, I'm telling you, this guy – can play a lot of positions. You're going to see him. He's a big guy. He runs well. He's a basketball guy. I think he could end up finding a place on the defensive side of the ball. Just one of those guys you'd love to have, kind of an impact guy, and obviously, a big-time athlete. Before we get out of here, we're going to talk about the Georgia weekend. We're going to talk about that visitor weekend, which we are expecting to be absolutely massive. I mean, let's just talk expectations first of all. Andrew, what are your thoughts on who wants to come to that game?
Everybody.
Literally everybody.
I think one of the most interesting things about that weekend is, you also have the Auburn-Oklahoma game at Auburn. So a lot of kids are going to have to pick and choose which game they're going to go to, especially the in-state kids. Now, I think out-of-state kids, you're going to get more of your top end targets. You're going to get all your commitments back on campus. You're going to get most of your probably remaining targets. Now, Ty Jackson has come out and said he's not going to take any more visits. We'll see about that. But Justus Terry is going to be back in town. A lot of these new offers are probably going to be back in Tuscaloosa as well. And then you're going to have a lot of 26s, 27s. I don't know how many 28s are going to get invited to this game. Somebody asked on the board, is there going to be over 200 recruits at this game? doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be 200 recruits when you have a big home game and home environment like this. It just means the talent kind of goes up a little bit more, and the numbers aren't going to necessarily grow. You're still going to have kind of the same numbers, but you're also not inviting all of those 28s, all those 27s, all those guys that you're probably not heavily recruiting. They're probably not getting invited to the Georgia game. Most of your top end guys are getting invited and they're all, not only are they getting invited, they're coming to Tuscaloosa. So it's going to be a huge weekend.
Joseph?
Yeah, it's going to be a big time weekend. I'm really just interested in seeing which 2025 prospects committed elsewhere may get on campus. Some of those new 2025 offers that we've talked about, like Mason Dunn and Tavius Richardson, some of those recent D-line offers that have been extended. Just seeing who gets out on campus in that 2025 class. And then also, like Bone said, the commitments too. And even though it's the Georgia game, it's one of the biggest games, if not the biggest game in all of college football this year. You still want to get as many of those commits back on campus as you can. And I know there's going to be some schedule conflicts. I even talked to Keelan Russell about that, how, he's going to have some logistics to figure out to get to Alabama. Doing that during the season isn't always necessarily the easiest thing. And I say that just to say that, if a kid who said that he wanted to be on campus isn't able to make it for one reason or the other, travel issues, something related to his team, I wouldn't necessarily read too much into it. I think everybody's going to want to try to be at this game if they can. But that's the most interesting thing for me. And then also, just that 2026 groups, seeing which in-state prospects get on campus as well.
I think the one thing, they're going to have a gatekeeper, right? Because, you think official, you think visitors, it's not a visitor. It is a group of visitors. You know what I mean? And there's always going to be a trainer or a mentor or a coach who wants to bring 27 people. We've seen this many times before. It's before Joseph. What was that? It's probably before Joseph's time. But the year Tebow, Andre Smith, and everybody showed up for LSU was one of the craziest. You remember that, Andrew? Mm-hmm. One of the craziest times. Absolutely. Didn't Takeo Spikes, not Takeo, but who was the linebacker went to Florida? Brandon Spikes went to that game. It was a madhouse. Tebow was Tebow mania, Andre mania. I don't think it'll reach that level, but you bring up a good point about Auburn. I don't know has their game time been determined? I know Bama's a night game, 6:30. Is Auburn? I think it's still to be determined.
Maybe.
I think I saw it last night on the schedule, so that could factor in exactly what happens. Because, theoretically, you could probably subtract the crowd. If it's 11 a.m. start, you could go to Auburn for 2 hours, break out, and go to the Alabama game. I'm not sure how many people will be doing that. Well, anyways, guys, we're going to give you one final thought before we get out of here. Give me 30 seconds of recruiting. Appreciate, again, everyone for turning into the live show. Appreciate each and every one of you. Check us out on the roundtable. Some of you guys are always there. Give us your feedback. Ask us your questions. Slap Joseph around. Whatever you need to do. But, Joseph, give us your final thoughts. 3
months till December 4th. A lot of time, left in the recruiting cycle for those evaluations to be made in the 2025 class, for visits to be taken, getting top targets on campus. A lot can happen, as we saw last week. What was it on Wednesday? We were talking about how the visitors list wasn't up to par and people were expecting there to be, bigger names on campus. Well, that ended up being the case, getting somebody like Braylon Womack, Justus Terry, Bodney Cleveland, some of those guys on campus. So a lot can happen in a few days and a lot can happen in 3 months. So there's a long time left in this recruiting cycle.
Andrew Bone?
Yeah, I think the new offers have been something that has really stood out, on the D line, in the secondary. We obviously have seen some underclassmen offers, but the seniors, the guys that are starting to emerge, the guys that are starting to make their way back to campus for one visit. Are they going to get back for the second visit, a third visit, an official? Do they potentially flip? That's something that we're watching closely. Mason Dunn, as was mentioned earlier, is that's a kid that is out of Tupelo, committed to Ole Miss. Alabama went and saw him play the other night. There's a lot of interest there. So, some of these guys in the secondary, especially Mason Dunn, somebody that we're watching closely. And as Joseph mentioned, just a couple of weeks away from that Georgia game, it's going to be really exciting to see who all makes it to campus that weekend.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in. We'll have the BOL Big Show tomorrow. You guys can watch that. That'll have team writer Charlie Potter, our extraordinaire, guru team coverage guy, along with young Blake Byler. I said Bliner again, Andrew. I should be Bliner, but it's Blake Byler, who does a great job. He's been with us for about a month. He does a great job. Jimmy Stein, Joseph Hastings, Andrew Bone, Tim Watts. We'll all be on there discussing things, and also have a recruiting show later in the week and a few more things for you guys. Appreciate you turning in, and thank you. We'll see you soon. Roll Tide.